You know, we live in an era where technology just seems to zoom ahead, right? Old stuff gets replaced so fast.
Yeah, blink and you miss it. You assume some things are just gone.
Exactly. You'd think certain formats, certain ways of doing things are pure history. Museum pieces.
Like audio tapes, maybe.
Precisely. But what if we told you there's a real active market right now for, well, high-speed copying audio tapes?
Sounds pretty retro.
It does. But we're diving into a market forecast report today, the global edition for 2025, and it shows this isn't just a few collectors, it's a business.
And we've got the numbers right here. It paints this, well, fascinating picture. A market that's not just hanging on, but actually consistently growing.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really get into this report. We want to figure out the surprising trends, the why behind it still being around.
And see what the data actually tells us about where this, let's face it, legacy tech is heading.
It's kind of a shortcut, really, to understanding a corner of the tech world you probably thought just, poof, vanished.
And finding out where it still provides real value. It's pretty interesting.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The report kicks off with the global view, and honestly, it's kind of surprising right off the bat.
Get this. In 2021, the global market, $50 million.
50 million for copying audio tapes at high speed, and it's not going down.
Nope. Projected to hit $55 million this year, 2025.
And looking further out, the forecast suggests it'll reach $66.5 million by 2033.
Yeah, and what's really interesting there is that steady climb. It works out to a global compound annual growth rate, CAGR, of 2.4%.
Okay, 2.4% might not sound earth-shattering.
Right, but for a technology that, most people wrote off years ago, that's actually significant. It tells you there's a real persistent need, something digital isn't quite covering.
So the massive question is why? I mean, we've got instant digital everything streaming.
Who needs fast tape copies?
Well, the report highlights some key, very specific uses. Big ones are archives, places needing to preserve maybe unique, fragile audio.
Okay, that makes sense. And educational institutions, think language labs, lecture archives on tape, that sort of thing.
Right, large volumes maybe?
Exactly. And also specialist media, like niche music labels, maybe still doing tape releases, spoken word stuff, broadcast archives, digging out old reels.
So situations where you need volume, maybe efficiency for specific workflows, or I guess dealing with existing tape libraries?
Precisely. These specific kind of enduring needs are what keep the market alive. It's not nostalgia, it's practicality in certain niches.
All right, so it's a real market, not just a blip. Let's zoom in a bit. Where is this happening? The report breaks it down by region. Let's start with North America. It holds a pretty big piece of the pie.
Yeah, it does. According to the report, North America was $14.3 million back in 2021.
And that's set to climb to $15.3 million in 2025. And projected to hit $17.8 million by 2033.
So the overall CGR for North America comes in at 1.9%.
A little lower than the global average, but still growing.
All right. And within that, the U.S. is obviously the biggest player.
Yeah.
Started at $12 million in 2021, expected to reach $14.8 million by 2033. That's about 1.8% CAGR.
But here's a little interesting detail, Canada. Smaller market, sure, started at $1.4 million. But its projected CAGR is actually higher than the U.S. at 2.4%, expected to reach $1.9 million.
That is interesting. Relatively faster growth. Mexico also showing steady growth, around 2.1% CAGR.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's slightly different in Canada? Maybe specific government archiving projects or educational standards?
Could be. The numbers hint at these little regional quirks.
Yeah.
Specific drivers may be varying slightly.
Okay, let's hop across the pond to Europe. What's the picture there?
Europe's total was $12.5 million in 2021.
Projected to rise to $13.4 million in 2025.
And expected to hit $16 million by 2033.
Okay, so that gives Europe a CAGR of 2.2%, slightly higher than North America.
Yeah, a bit closer to the global average. And when you look at the countries inside Europe, you see some different stories playing out.
Like what?
Well, Germany and the UK show pretty solid growth. Germany, for instance, starts at $2.2 million, forecast to reach $3 million by 2033. That's a 2.7% CAGR, quite healthy.
And the UK?
UK is strong too, 2.5% CAGR, projected to go from $1.4 million to $1.9 million.
But then you contrast that with, say, France or Italy. France is projected pretty flat between 2021 and 2025 at $1.5 million, only inching up later. Italy's growth is even slower, just 1.3% CAGR.
Exactly. And look at Luxembourg, tiny market, $1.3 million. And it's forecast to stay at $0.3 million right through to 2033, though technically there's a tiny 1.6% CAGR factored in there.
So it's really uneven within Europe.
It really is. It suggests those core drivers, the archives, the educational needs, the media niches, they're just not uniform.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Drivers, the archives, the educational needs, the media niches, they're just not uniform across the continent. Maybe different funding priorities, different states of digital transition in those sectors.
Right. It really hammers home that this demand is tied to very specific, maybe institutional situations.
Definitely.
Okay, now, according to the report, here's where things are really interesting. Asia Pacific, identified as the fastest growing region globally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is where the action seems to be, relatively speaking, leading the whole pack with a 3% CAGR overall.
And it started from a strong base, too. $18.6 million back in 2021.
Huge. And it's projected for a big leap, hitting $26 million by 2033.
So who's driving that?
Well, two countries really stand out in the report. China is the giant, no surprise there. $8.1 million in 2021, expected to grow to $11.5 million. That's a 3.1% CAGR.
Dominant, yeah. But then there's India. Wow.
Right. India shows one of the highest growth rates for any single country in the report, a whopping 3.5% CAGR.
Going from $3.3 million in 2021 up to a projected $5 million by 2033. That's significant growth.
It really is. Japan also shows solid growth, 2.5% CAGR. Southeast Asia as a block is growing steadily too, 2.3%. South Korea and Australia are a bit slower, but still positive.
So this really raises the question, what is going on in Asia-Pacific, particularly India and China, that's fueling this faster growth for tape copying?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is it the sheer scale of, say, educational systems needing materials, massive government archives being processed, maybe specific media production workflows that still rely on tape intermediates?
Or maybe large-scale digitization projects from tape?
Could be that too. The report flags them as key drivers, suggesting those core needs we talked about, archival, educational, are particularly strong or maybe even accelerating there.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift focus slightly again. Latin America, what does the report say there?
Latin America shows consistent, steady growth as well. Not quite the pace of Asia Pacific, but solid.
Who's leading the charge?
Brazil, definitely. It started at $0.9 million in 2021, projected to reach $1.5 million by 2033. That's 2.8% CAGR, which is actually higher than the global average.
Okay, so Brazil's punching above its weight there, relatively.
Seems so. And other countries like Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Chile, they're all showing positive growth too. Mostly CAGRs between 2% and 2.6%. Smaller numbers overall, but the trend is consistently upward.
So even in smaller markets, the need is there and seems to be growing steadily.
Yeah, it reinforces that idea that these niche applications for tape copying are pretty widespread globally, even if the scale varies.
Right. Finally, let's round things out with the Middle East and Africa. The numbers here tell a bit of a different story, don't they?
Yeah, this region looks much more stable, maybe even stagnant in places, compared to the growth elsewhere.
Egypt, for instance.
Egypt is forecast to be remarkably stable. $0.3 million in 2021, $0.3 million in 2025, $0.3 million projected for 2033. The CAGR is tiny, like 0.6%.
Basically flat.
Pretty much. Turkey shows a little growth, going from $0.2 million to $0.3 million, about 1.1% CGR.
And the rest of Middle East category?
Also very stable revenues, according to the report. Minimal CGR, around 0.7%.
So a real contrast to, say, Asia-Pacific.
A stark contrast. It suggests that maybe the specific drivers are weaker there, or perhaps they've already transitioned more fully to digital for these tasks, or maybe the sheer volume of legacy tapes needing duplication just isn't as high.
Could be any number of factors. Infrastructure, funding.
Exactly. But the data shows much less momentum for this specific service in that region compared to others.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. We've dug into the numbers from this report, gone global, then region by region. We found this honestly surprisingly resilient $50 million global market for high-speed audio tape copying. And it's not dying out. It's actually growing, projected over $66 million by 2033. We saw real hotspots, especially in Asia-Pacific, driven by China and particularly India.
Yeah, and steady persistence pretty much everywhere else, even if growth rates vary.
So, okay, what does this all actually mean for you, listening to this?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is how it challenges that easy assumption about old tech just disappearing. obsolete means gone.
Right.
This shows it's not always that simple. This isn't a market floating on nostalgia. It's driven by practical, specific needs in archives, education, some media niches. The data shows that for those jobs, high-speed tape copying is still relevant.
And even growing in importance in some major economies.
Exactly. It's a really potent reminder that technology life cycles can be complex. It's not always just out with the old, in with the new. Sometimes the old finds a way to stick around where it still makes sense.
It really does make you reconsider things you might have just assumed were totally gone, doesn't it?
For sure. And maybe here's a final thought, building on what the report mentions about archives and education. Given this surprisingly strong, growing demand we see in places like India or China, what specific hurdles might they be facing in, say, mass digitization that keeps tape copying such a vital service there?
That's interesting. Like, maybe the infrastructure isn't there for pure digital workflows at scale yet.
Could be. Or maybe the cost benefit still favors tape duplication for certain kinds of projects. And thinking about the content itself, what unique cultural history, what irreplaceable audio might be living on these tapes that are being copied right now, largely invisible to the main digital stream.
That's a great point. Stuff we might not even know exists. A really thought-provoking angle to end on.
Yeah, makes you wonder.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into a market that most of us probably never even knew was still ticking, let alone growing.
Welcome to a deep dive. Okay, think about this. A technology most of us probably haven't touched since, what, the 90s?
Yeah, it definitely feels like ancient history.
Something physical, magnetic, maybe a bit temperamental. You'd assume that market is just, well, gone today, right?
You absolutely would.
Well, get ready for a bit of a surprise. Today we're diving into the pretty fascinating and honestly unexpected world of the high-speed audio tape market.
It really does sound like a relic, doesn't it? But our source material for today, it's an excerpt from High-Speed Audio Tape Market Dynamics 2021-2033. It actually paints a very different picture.
How so?
Well, it calls it a legacy sector, which, okay, fair enough, but then right away it mentions it seeing consistent, if modest, growth worldwide.
Consistent growth. For audio tapes.
Yeah.
Seriously. Okay, what's the story here then? Our mission today is really to unpack what dynamics are keeping this, niche alive and even growing in a totally digital world.
Exactly. So we're going to look at the forces, some quite unlikely, that are
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Exactly. So we're going to look at the forces, some quite unlikely, that are actually driving demand, and also the real restraints holding it back.
Right, the challenges.
Yeah, and how the industry itself is kind of adapting, finding its place.
Okay, let's dig into that first bit. Against all the odds, what is driving this demand for, specifically, high-speed tape duplication now?
Well, the report highlights something pretty interesting. A significant resurgence of analog audio formats. We've all seen it with vinyl. Right?
Oh yeah, vinyl's everywhere.
But there's this similar wave of nostalgia, this desire for tangible media that's also boosting cassettes. You've got collectors, audiophiles, even younger people discovering them.
Huh. So it's partly that retro cool thing holding the actual object.
Absolutely. And this resurgence, it directly fuels demand for high-speed duplication.
Why high-speed specifically?
Because you have indie labels, independent artists using cassettes for these limited edition, retro-style releases. They're not pressing millions, maybe just a few hundred, maybe a couple thousand.
Well, runs.
Exactly. So high-speed duplication is, well, crucial. It cuts their costs per unit way down and lets them get these unique releases out much faster than the old ways.
That makes sense. Tapping into a niche with something cool and collectible.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other drivers beyond just music and nostalgia?
Yeah, the source points to some practical, low-cost uses, too. Think archival stuff or maybe language learning tools, especially, it seems, in developing countries.
Really? How so?
Well, in places where digital tech might be unreliable or just too expensive, budget-friendly tape duplication is still a really solid, accessible way to get instructional content out there. Like, imagine a school library in a remote spot using durable, easy-to-play tapes.
Interesting. Okay, so nostalgia, indie music, and some specific practical uses, but it can all be positive, right? What are the big hurdles the report mentions?
Yeah, the biggest restraint, kind of obviously, is just the massive decline in mass consumer use. I mean, digital platforms totally dominate how we listen to music, how we store data.
Right.
So the general market for tapes is just tiny compared to what it was.
Yeah, you're not seeing the latest Taylor Swift album drop only on cassette.
Not likely. And plus, magnetic tapes themselves have issues. They degrade over time. You get signal loss.
It's sound quality limitations, too.
Definitely. Lower fidelity compared to good digital or even, well-pressed vinyl. And there's maybe an environmental angle, too.
The plastic waste.
Potentially, yeah. The report flags concerns about plastic and magnetic waste, which, down the line, could mean stricter regulations.
Okay, so dealing with shrinking demand and physical limits. Given those pretty big challenges, how is this market actually adapting enough to show any growth? What are the new trends?
This is where it gets quite clever, I think. Duplication systems aren't just analog to analog anymore. They're increasingly integrating digital to analog conversion, DC interfaces.
Okay, for someone maybe not familiar, what does that actually do here?
Think of it like a bridge. It lets studios take a perfect digital audio file, the kind made on a computer, right?
Yep.
And it efficiently converts that into the specific analog signal you need to record straight onto the tape. So it merges modern production with the retro format.
Okay. Getting the high-quality digital sound onto the physical tape. Got it.
Exactly. And running alongside that tech trend is the rise of these really specialized boutique duplication services.
So not just churning them out.
No, not at all. They're offering customized products, things like hand-assembled cassettes, specific colored shells, really artistic packaging, the J cards. It turns it from just a tape into a unique collector's item.
Right, crafting something special for a very specific audience.
Precisely. And you see this driving demand in areas like movie soundtracks or indie game soundtracks being released on cassette. It's a novelty, sure, but it's also merchandise, promotion.
Something fans want to own.
Yeah, which then fuels the need for these high-speed but also customized duplication outfits.
Okay, so the picture from the report is pretty clear then. It is a legacy sector, no doubt. But it's got this strategic importance in certain spots, collectors, indie artists, low-cost education, niche promos. And it's showing that modest growth because it's adapting smartly, using tech like Dido, focusing on boutique, custom stuff, not trying to be mass market.
That really nails it. It's found its corner and it's evolving right there.
It really makes you rethink what a dead technology actually means. The high-speed audio tape market, yeah, it's niche, but it's surprisingly resilient, kept alive by things like nostalgia, indie creativity.
And by adapting, using modern tech, and focusing on making something unique.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great example of how specific needs and cultural trends and, a bit of creative thinking can keep these older technologies going, even thriving in their own way, when the main platforms have totally moved on.
Absolutely. Very true.
It definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it? Beyond audio tapes, what other legacy technologies might have some surprising staying power, or maybe some hidden cultural relevance today that we're just overlooking? Something for you to think about until our next deep dive.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.